Hi, I'm Gail Sokol and welcome to my kitchen. Today we'll be making a rustic plum tart. And rustic basically means it's sort of like everyday food, peasant food, you know, it's the people's food. Not hard to form, very easy when we set up this pie afterwards. And I call it a tart because it really doesn't have any pie pan. So we're going to start with what's known as a pâte brisée or a broken pie crust because it's so flaky and you're going to see the flakiness. We're going to start in the food processor with a super simple recipe for a crust. And this is a keeper. 1 cup of all-purpose flour, half a cup of white whole wheat flour. And white whole wheat flour is different than whole wheat. It's got a little less wheaty flavor and it's a little nutty. It adds a little nutty quality to what you're doing, but it has a little fiber and it actually goes really nicely with the fruit. And then I'm going to put in 12 tablespoons of unsalted butter. Now I didn't add any salt. If you would like, you can add a pinch of salt or up to 1/8 teaspoon of salt. I don't always add salt to my crust because people are always watching their sodium. If you want to, you can add just a touch of that. Now at this point, we're not going to be blending in our butter too much. We're going to be pulsing our butter or cutting in the butter. And you can do this with a pastry blender as well. So here we go. We want to get pea-sized pieces. And it only takes a few pulses really to get there. So we're still not there. You can see the butter's still a little too big. Those are huge peas, so we gotta cut them down just a little bit more. And I've cubed the butter. So here we go, we have it. They look really, really good. I can show you. You can see it just looks like oats almost, but little bits of butter. You want that butter to stay in there because that's what's gonna cause the flakiness when it bakes. Now, this is 1/3 cup plus a teaspoon of ice cold water. I just took it out of some icy water that I had just made. And this is my secret ingredient, 1 teaspoon of cider vinegar. Apple cider vinegar, if you don't want to use vinegar, you can actually use lemon juice. Just that little hint of acid will actually make the dough more what's known as extensible. And that will make it easier to roll out. All right, so here we go. We're just going to pulse it. We just want to bring it together. It's not going to come together in a ball like you might think. That's all we're going to do. And the next step is we're going to put it into a bowl, form it to a disc, and chill it. Okay, so I've put my crust ingredients into a large bowl. I always like to do that. And then I take my bowl scraper, you know, the one that's really bendable, and I'm going to push the dough together just to form sort of a ball or a disc. And I don't want to overwork it at this point because it's full of that beautiful butter and it's just got that little tiny bit of vinegar, which is actually going to work magic when we start rolling out the dough, and I'll explain more about how it works in a minute. So I'm going to take what I have, and I know it's very, very rough looking. Okay, talk about a rustic plum tart. This is really rustic. And don't worry about it looking like that now. This is really the way you want to put it into the plastic wrap. Get a big piece of plastic wrap, fold one piece over, fold the other piece over, and then fold underneath on either side like you're tucking a baby into bed, and push and sort of let the work of the plastic wrap sort of, you know, make a barrier between you and the dough. And then I like to let this rest and relax the gluten that we've formed because mixing develops gluten. We're going to let this rest in the refrigerator for only about 30 minutes. All right, so we're ready to get our filling ready, our plums. You don't like plums, you can use something else. But plums are stone fruits, and that's because inside they actually have a stone. It's called a stone, and plums are part of a category known as drupes. I'm not making this up. Drupes, D-R-U-P-E-S, and that is a stone fruit. So that includes anything from an apricot, a peach, a nectarine, things like that that have this stone in the center. And it is known as a stone. The actual seed that regenerates the fruit is inside the stone. All right, sort of cool. So I cut this in half, and I'm going to try to get rid of the stone. And if you can't get rid of it because it just doesn't come out, you might want to cut around it. So I'm going to cut these very thin. All right, so you're going to be sure you tuck your fingers in. And if you notice, I am not peeling these. These have a beautiful thin skin. You do not need to peel it. Remember, this is a very rustic tart, so no peeling. We're going to be doing about 4 plums, depending on how big they are. And these are not too big, but I like a good amount of filling. And cut them thin. All right, so I'll show you what I did. I took my paring knife and cut around. And then I twist it. Just twist it. And you want them to be ripe but not mushy. And you don't want to ever cut them like that, because if you're putting the knife against the skin, unless your knife goes right through that skin, it could squish your fruit. So I always like to do it with the flesh side up. All right, so we're going to move that over. And again, that stone is in there, so I'm just going to cut around it and get it out of there so I can actually cut the rest of the fruit up. All right. Cut as thin as you want. You can make them thicker if you want. I just like them nice and thin. And then I can put them over my crust. So twist and slice. You want to do about 4, like I said. We're going to get rid of that stone. Don't call it a seed, because it's not a seed. All right, so all my contents of my beautiful rustic tart are getting ready to go, and we have our crust. It's been sort of hanging out in the fridge and chilling for about 30 minutes. I could have even frozen it if I wanted to. Now, part of the filling is a 1/4 cup of granulated sugar, 3 tablespoons of all-purpose flour, and 3/4 of a teaspoon of cinnamon. I'm just going to mix that up. If you like a little more cinnamon, you can add a little more. If you like other spices like ginger, little nutmeg, allspice, that would be nice too. You could warm up those spices even more. So I'm just going to mix this up and get this ready. So this is part of my mise en place, getting everything ready to go. So once our crust is rolled out, we're going to be ready to fill this thing. All right, so now we're ready to roll out our crust. And again, remember, it's not a typical pie. It's super easy, very rustic. It's sort of the people's food, all right? And remember, I told you that I added that little bit of apple cider vinegar. Well, this is where it's going to come in handy. So when we start rolling this out, sometimes many of you have written to me that you've had trouble with your pie crust. When you roll it out, sometimes it sort of boings back like a rubber band. Well, that can happen because the gluten has really overformed, or you have really messed with your dough a little too much. So what we do is we add a little bit of acid. Some people might add lemon juice. I like to add apple cider vinegar, but just a little bit. And what that does is it takes those gluten-forming proteins and sort of denatures the protein. It sort of breaks it down a little so it doesn't form so tightly a network, that protein network that I'm always talking about, that forms structure and strength in our pie doughs and all of our baked goods. So it actually helps this. Look how nice this is rolling out, okay? This is the case in point. This is the reason why I'm using my vinegar. It's not boinging back. It's beautiful. It's easy to roll out. It's easy to move. And if I don't move it really well, I can get my bench scraper and sort of loosen it a little bit. So I want to get to maybe about 12 to 14 inches. You can make it as big as you want or as small as you want. You can even make individual ones. This would probably make 4 to 5 individual plum rustic tarts. So I'm just going to get that rolled out as much as I want. And I do want to make sure that I can move it. But you can see it's beautiful. And you do see the chunks of butter in there. And that's what we want. We want to see those little chunks because remember, they're going to melt. They're going to melt inside the oven and they're going to form spaces. Those spaces are going to fill with steam, air, that invisible ingredient that we always use, and it's going to be an incredible leavener to actually puff up on the dough above it and below it, and we're going to get flakiness, and this dough is super flaky. All right, so this is rustic. It's not a perfect circle. I'm not asking you to be perfect, so don't worry about it. So now we're going to take our sugar, cinnamon, and flour mixture, and we're actually going to put it right in the middle. Right in the middle. Okay? So it's got a little bit of a thickening agent there, the flour, you have your flavoring, and you're just going to leave about a 2-inch area around that is not spread with the flour mixture. Then you're going to take your plums, your gorgeous sliced plums, and you can arrange them and make them super pretty, but I like to sort of pile them. It just looks really nice. Looks really nice. And then I'll arrange them. If you want to make them really pretty and really in concentric circles, you can do whatever you want, but I just think they look nice. And then I press down. All right, I press right down. And then I have 3 tablespoons of unsalted butter that I've made in tiny little cubes, teeny tiny little cubes. And I'm just going to scatter it around. And before I've done this, I've preheated my oven to 400 degrees. Most pies and tarts bake at a high temperature. And high to me is like over 350, over 375. So about 400. And this is going to take about 40 minutes to bake. And we're not done yet. We're going to make a lot of little additions here to make it nice. The butter just adds like a little extra. I don't know, it doesn't make a sauce, but it just coats them very nicely. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take an egg. This is a whole egg, and nothing else has been added to it, and I'm going to use it as an egg wash. And we're just going to go around the edges. And if your pie crust breaks or rips, that is part of the charm of a rustic tart. Don't worry about it if it breaks or rips. That's what it's all about. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one edge and put it over the plum and just keep folding. See what I've done? Folding. Almost like you're folding in your, like cuffing pair of pants, and you're just folding. Can be done any which way. And yes, I know my crust has broken, and it's lovely. This is a beautiful rustic tart. This is gorgeous, and I'm pressing down on this whole thing. So what I want to do before I do the last remaining little extra something that I want to do with it before it goes in the oven, I'm going to shush my little Kuchenlooser, it's called, underneath, and put it on a pizza pan that's been lined with parchment. And then I want to egg wash again, this time on the crust that's visually showing on the outside. All right, just egg wash that. Just egg wash all around. If you don't like that extra flour, I sort of like the look of it. It's sort of like this rustic look. You can brush it off with a pastry brush, a dry pastry brush. All right, so once you have this, all right, and get all your dough coated, then I take an additional 1/4 cup of granulated sugar, and that goes over everybody. Crust, filling, everybody. All right, isn't that nice? Just lovely. And that'll caramelize on top and make it really nice and brown. And then I'm going to put this in the oven for 40 minutes at 400 degrees. Our rustic plum tart is out of the oven, and it is gorgeous. You can see the colors of the purple from the outside of the plum, the peel. It's beautiful in contrast with that flaky crust. And you can see the little sugar and caramelization with a slice of this and a topping of either some whipped cream or vanilla ice cream. I think I'd be set. This is a perfect dessert. So for more videos and recipes, go to my website, gailsokol.com.